evictions! Stop all evictions! Stop all evictions!
On Friday, the message was in support of a Hartford family with young children facing eviction.
Cancel rent! Cancel rent! Cancel rent!
But the work of these advocates extends to anyone struggling to pay rent amid the pandemic.
Unfortunately, this is not the only family I've spoke with this week who's dealing with eviction.
A family with an eviction on their record finds it almost impossible to secure safe housing.
According to the Connecticut Fair Housing Center, there have been more than 2,000 evictions in the state since September. This, despite an eviction moratorium the governor put in place that has been extended until April.
That there are hundreds or thousands of evictions that are still happening around the state, even under the moratorium. This goes to show the shortcomings of the moratorium.
There are exceptions to it. Tenants still need to pay rent and can still be evicted if they don't pay 6 or more months' worth of rent. The group's concern is that when that moratorium ends, there will be thousands more people left without a home.
What we've heard from Connecticut Fair Housing Center is that there are estimates that there may be as many as 40,000 evictions once the moratorium is lifted in the state of Connecticut. That is a crisis. That is a housing crisis. That is a tsunami.
Advocates are calling for more protections for renters as well as rent relief since the state's rental assistance program is currently closed.
Real, authentic rental assistance programs that are targeted to people in eviction court and not these programs where there's 100 conditions for and really inaccessible to apply for.
The Connecticut Department of Housing says it is currently developing a new rental assistance program separate from the previous one and anticipates that will launch in March. As for the Hartford family who faced a hearing in court today, an agreement was reached and they'll have 30 additional days before they have to move. In Hartford, Gabby Molina, Fox 61 News.